By one investigator is reminiscent of a weird religious rite. 5 persons, including actress Sharon Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate.
These were found inside the house, 1 in the vehicle and 2 on the front lawn.
On earth made him kill all those people?
All but 1 or 6 he was pronounced dead.
Monster. Som du vet about, it was a monster.
We know their names, we know their faces. Perhaps we know more about them than we know about their victims. Humanity has always been obsessed with what lurks in the dark, even more so when the monster in the shadows is another person. The need to dissect and obsess over serial and mass murderers has its roots in a multitude of complex influences, but that's not the subject for today. We're here to discuss Walter Sullivan, the awful and terrifying villain of the 4th game in the Silent Hill series. Much as the world stands in horrified awe of real murderers, Silent Hill fans have long been intrigued by one of the only Silent Hill enemies to be truly human. Who is Walter Sullivan, and how do we define what he is and what he does? First, let's step back and examine the bigger picture. Serial killers are those disturbed individuals who take delight in killing others. They kill multiple people over a short period of time, often in the same fashion, often targeting the same kinds of people. Before we decide if Walter Sullivan himself qualifies as such an individual, we must examine what a serial killer really is. There are certain aspects of personality and action that define them. Besides having killed multiple people in a short time, they often have other things in common. Typically, they choose their victims based on criteria or bias they hold. Their style of killing is often ritualistic, symbolic, and routine for them, killing all victims via a certain method, for instance. Often, they have suffered abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, at the hands of their caregivers growing up. But that's not always the case. More likely, they were sadistic from a very young age, such as torturing animals, bullying others, or otherwise causing trouble. Their criminal history also usually starts at a very young age. Most often, these people are predatory. They're very smart, or at least very good at manipulating other people. Almost all of them seem normal from the outside, but in reality, this is a mask in order to trick other people. Most likely, these people did not finish college or high school, and they had a hard time keeping employment. Often, they kill to have power over others. They kill for enjoyment. They kill and they manipulate other people. But how do these traits manifest in actual serial killers? The following contains clips from other documentaries about such people.
What was unique about Holmes was the fact that he actually finished school. He went all the way through college. Most serial killers don't do that.
While Holmes languishes in prison, he writes an autobiography titled Holmes's Own Story.
He's supposedly going to be confessing, but he starts out creating a picture in the countryside. It's not a confession. He knows that he's going to be writing this thing, and people are going to be reading it, maybe 100 years from now or more. We all want to be remembered. These guys make sure they are.
On the first day of trial, the courtroom is stunned as Holmes dismisses his counsel. Holmes, the multi-murderer, is now Holmes, the attorney.
Holmes is now in charge. He's center stage. He doesn't just want to be on trial. He wants to be the ringmaster, to get everything.
You can have various elements to a psychopathic personality. There's indifference to people's feelings, manipulation, lying, numerous other factors. There's supposed to be about 30, 40 different things.
Once he sacked his own counsel, he cross-examines other witnesses, and it's very much sort of how QCs are supposed to talk.
A wandering band of members of a so-called religious cult with a leader they call Jesus has had 3 of its followers arrested in the investigation of the murder of Sharon Tate and 6 others.
The man said to have been the inspiration of them all, the leader of the cult, Charles Manson.
None of them appeared as flamboyant as they've been in the past. In the courtroom, Manson watched and listened, but today made no comment.
Did you kill Shay?
Hell no.
Did you cut Himman's ear off?
Hell yes.
How'd that feel when you cut his ear off?
What did it feel like?
Yeah.
Well, I had done what he said for about 20 years. I'd done everything he told me to do. And I got to thinking, now, why don't this guy do something I tell him to do? And he said, no. I said, well, how comes I'm always doing what you tell me to do, but then you never do what I say do? And he said, well, blah, blah, blah. So I said, now you do what I say. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like walking to the drugstore.
Now that we know what they are like, now that we've seen what they're like, it's time to compare what we know of serial killers to Walter Sullivan. Walter was born in apartment 302 of Ashfield Heights. The moment he was born, he was abandoned, his mother forcibly torn from him by his abusive father. All that is left of that bond is an umbilical cord. Walter is found by the apartment supervisor and later adopted by the Wish House. The Wish House orphanage is really a front for the Order, the cult that is the main antagonist of the Silent Hill series. Of course, this does not bode well for the poor child. He is raised in a violent, abusive place, where bad behavior leads to punishment in the form of the water prison. This is a literal prison, a panopticon, a type of constant surveillance which is so invasive and abusive, it's not used in reality. Walter is only a young child when he is exposed to suffering on a level which is impossible to imagine. His friends are killed before his eyes. Bob, another child mentioned in Walter's letters, is later killed by the cult. The children are starved, beaten, tortured, malnourished, and denied any kind of love. Andrew DeSalvo at one point punishes Walter by forcing him to eat leeches. This is not familial abuse. This is more than child abuse. This is torture. This is unimaginable and indescribably awful, and it is Walter's childhood. In spite of that, he looks at his childhood as happy, as seen in the fictional story description of the boy's life. He had friends at the Wish House. All he wanted for was his mother. It is Dahlia Gillespie who manipulates and tricks the young Walter into believing he can have his mother back, that she is asleep in room 302, and there is one way to return her to life. Walter becomes obsessed with researching this ritual, but he doesn't start it. Walter is, of course, part of an actual cult, but we can't put him in the same category of serial killers who kill for God, because this is a fictional world. Walter isn't believing delusions. His magic powers are real. That makes it more difficult to parse out his story, but we can do it. Walter has 2 sides to himself, the child and the adult. The child is nothing like what we might imagine a young killer to be. He is shy, nervous, and kind-hearted. He protects Eileen, where we've been told that most young killers are sadistic and even desire pain in others. He is afraid of adults. He fails to gain entry to room 302 throughout his childhood. Where is the manipulation? Where is his strength of lying? The boy and the adult have none. Walter is an awkward, socially stunted young man who doesn't seem capable of manipulating anyone. All his kills rely upon his psychic powers. He never lures anyone anywhere. His childhood lacks those typical signs: criminal activity, sadism, lack of friends. What he has is pain in spades, abuse at the hands of adults. He is traumatized multiple times: his parents abandoning him, the incident with the leeches, the incident with the pet shop, his interactions with Richard at the apartment complex. These moments frighten and hurt him so much they put targets on the back of the adult responsible, so that later they are all killed as part of the ritual. During his teenage years, he spends time away from the cult. He is homeless, but still stays in Ashfield, sleeping in subway tunnels and most likely panhandling to survive. It is at this time that Eileen gives him her doll out of sympathy, and in response, he breaks down and cries. This is not someone who is lacking in empathy or ability to care. He recognizes Eileen's care for him and is so touched he cries. He does attend college for a time. He moves to Pleasant River at 19, but it doesn't last. He eventually leaves school and after some time begins killing at 24. For a few years, his whereabouts are unknown. One thing that must be mentioned is the inclusion of Volteal in the story. George Roston, a member of the cult and the man who personally taught Walter the rituals for the 21 sacraments, is said to have Volteal sneaked into Walter's consciousness to permit the sacraments to take place. Supposedly it is this act which gives Walter his psychic powers. We don't know exactly when this happens. What we have is the image of a young man who for the first 19 years of his life tries and fails desperately to find a place for himself in a very cruel world. He is tortured from childhood, abandoned by society, and fails at every attempt to become part of the world around him, losing jobs and leaving school. Yet he appears to be a normal person. He feels and empathizes with others. He is kind, though socially stunted due to abuse, and desires the company of others. He has no history of criminal activity, sadism, violent behavior, or otherwise deviant acts. Then he vanishes. For the next 5 years, we don't know what happened to him. At 24, he suddenly reappears and begins to kill, violently and gruesomely. What happened to Walter Sullivan? It must be said that Walter does have some things in common with serial killers. He does express enjoyment in the act of killing. His brutal murders are too involved and violent for him not to. He is seen cutting up monsters and behaving in sadistic ways. But we have no sign that this behavior existed before the murders started. Why would he wait? In fact, we clearly see he is not sadistic when the confrontation between man and child occurs. Walter is brutally tormenting Eileen, and his own self, his child self, stops him. Walter could easily overpower a child, yet he abstains. He runs away. It gives Henry a chance to intervene and save Eileen, delaying the sacraments for half the game. It creates an opening in which it is possible for Henry to actually stop Walter. All because he listened to his child self and did not kill Eileen. The child Walter does not like killing. What happened to change that? The people Walter murders are almost all connected to him in some way. Multiple victims are from the cult. The very first victim was Jimmy Stone, the Red Devil, a priest of Volteal. Other victims include former classmates from college, people Walter worked with or met in Ashfield, and those who lived near room 302. Only a few were random. The Locane siblings are a major difference. 2 children who lived in Silent Hill and are reborn in Walter's psyche as the twin victims monster, the only sacraments who do not become ghosts. These children are brutally murdered, where Jimmy Stone was shot in the back of the head, where other victims suffered somewhat painless deaths. These innocent children are hacked apart by an axe, Miriam especially. Other victims who suffered awfully include Cynthia and Eileen. The worse the person was, it seems they almost got off easily. It is the innocent, the pure, who suffer Walter's wrath. Why? Is it anger? Jealousy? What overwhelming emotions take control when Walter is confronted with the goodness in the world? It is even more interesting that the twin victims monster exists. It points at you, stares, judges you as guilty. It is Walter's guilt. He feels guilty for a murder. The game takes place in his mind. Not all of it is under his control. Parts of his subconscious surface and give us a peek into the secrets of his mind. More interesting is that one of the victims is actually Walter himself. Most serial killers are arrogant and want to hurt others. Few would hurt themselves. Who do they value more than themselves? But Walter kills himself in a grotesque and painful fashion. Crucifixion is not an easy death, but he is smiling as he dies. He is happy to be dead. The first time the player and Henry meet Walter, he is not attacking. He is mysterious, and only later we learn who he is. He just speaks of Eileen, how kind she was to him, then gives Henry the doll Eileen gave him. Yes, this doll creates a haunting, but it is otherwise harmless. If the player keeps it in the inventory for the whole game, it never does a thing. The doll means nothing to the sacraments. Walter genuinely wanted Henry to have it. Most of the game takes place in Walter's mind. We see his pains, we experience his suffering. We learn all about the things that brought him to this, the traumas, the tortures. We see him kill the innocent and the guilty. We also meet his younger self, a manifestation that exists because Walter still has good in him. He can be defeated. In a world where he is meant to control, he can be defeated, and is defeated by himself, by young Walter's interference. He's defeated by the umbilical cord. Umbilical cords have long been symbols of magic, thought in many cultures to contain magical powers. But it also represents dependence, an unhealthy need to survive through another. It is a source of life, a sign of protection, also a sign of inability to care for oneself. It is Walter's greatest weakness, because it is the broken connection between his mother, between himself and humanity. The umbilical cord has sat in a box for more than 24 years. It is rancid. The characters even comment on the smell. It is flesh which must be rotten and moldy by now. It is the symbol of Walter's twisted, demented self. He was human. He isn't anymore. He's been twisted into something else. Let's think for a moment of the inclusion of Voltaire as part of Walter's psyche. Why include that? We've already seen the series include a young psychic who was simply born with her powers, Alessa. Why include this creature as an explanation of Walter's powers? It's unnecessary. This small detail is included in the story when it didn't have to be. Why does the game tell us that Walter has a monster in his mind? In his childhood, Walter was a different person. Even in his mind, he is literally split into two people. For the first 19 years of his life, he was a sad, lonely man who killed no one and committed no crimes. Then he suddenly changes. What if Walter isn't in control? Or at least, what if Walter has been manipulated from the inside, pushed by a supernatural force to act on the darkest impulses of the human mind, and after a lifetime of suffering, he would have very little will to resist, especially since the act promises him what he wants most, his mother. Mother is the protector, the guardian. She loves you, no matter what. She takes care of you. Walter has been denied his mother all his life, has been denied love, care, and protection. That is what he wants. Love. And is it possible that a monster in his mind manipulates this desire to make him act in a way he previously never would? Silent Hill 4 is a story of suffering. On the one side, we have Henry, who seems by all accounts to be a mistreated, sad young man near to suicide, as I've explored in a previous video. Then there's Walter, who is the same. He is happy to kill himself for the ritual. He is tormented through his childhood and cries the only time anyone is kind to him. The difference is that the Order intervened and manipulated Walter's life. They never touch Henry until Walter comes around. Walter is Henry, what Henry might have been if the Order had taken him. He is a monster that turned upon his masters, a monster who only wants to be loved. The game has us learning all these awful things about him, sympathizing with him, because we're meant to. Walter is not a serial killer. His circumstances are too outlandish and supernatural to be the same. More than that, I think without the Order's influence, he wouldn't have ever killed. I think he would have been like Henry, isolated, living alone, avoiding others. This is why it took Henry to stop him. Someone who would understand. Someone who had a kind heart in spite of a hard life. That's why Eileen sympathized with him, why she reached out to a young Walter. And young Walter tried to save her because he represents the humanity left inside Walter, who he used to be, who the Order destroyed. And in the end, even when he wins, Walter looks defeated. Walter is guilty of monstrous things and awful acts. But once he was just a child who wanted love, a young man struggling to survive, a victim of the Order, like so many others.
Mom.